All right, my name is Nick. I'm a docent and a telescope operator here at Mount Wilson. I've been with Mount Wilson for about 14 years. I love the place. I can't get enough of it. And I'm going to be giving a short 15 to 20 minute talk about the general history of Mount Wilson, and I'm going to concentrate on the man whose vision made it possible, George Ellery Hale. When I finish, we'll have about 10 minutes or so of question and answer, and then I'm going to do the talk again. So you're welcome to go grab something to eat and come back at 3:30. Sam Hale, George Ellery Hale's grandson, will give a short talk about first light on the 100-inch in 1917. And then Alex Filipenko at 4 o'clock will be giving an astronomy talk, which is a ticketed event. So we'll clear the auditorium and your names are on a list, and anyone who has tickets are on a list. Of course, those of you who don't have tickets and are interested in that talk, you can lurk. I recommend lurking. It's a fine strategy around here. Because some people get tickets and don't show up, so you may as well take a chance and maybe you can get in. Otherwise, the grounds will be open, and if the weather holds, we'll even have viewing through the 60-inch and 100-inch telescopes tonight. So it's a big day for us. All right, so my talk is about the Mount Wilson Observatory. It's the center of our expanding universe. If I can have the next slide, Melanie. The Mount Wilson Observatory was founded and funded in 1904 with a 99-year lease from the Mount Wilson Hotel and Toll Road Company. And it was the brainchild of George Ellery Hale. If I could have the next slide. And that's George Ellery Hale. Now, George Ellery Hale was born in 1868 in Chicago. He was born to a fairly well-to-do family that actually became even better known and wealthier because of the misfortune of an awful lot of people. You see, when George Ellery Hale was only 3 years old, the Great Chicago Fire happened. Now, the Hales lived in a suburb, so they weren't directly affected by the fire, but when the new Chicago was going to be rebuilt, it was going to be rebuilt vertically with skyscrapers. This is kind of an interesting fact that a lot of people consider New York City, of course, is famous for its skyscrapers, but Chicago had the first American skyscrapers. And the reason why this benefited the Hales so much is that George Ellery Hale's father, William Hale, was in the elevator business. So he made a fortune supplying elevators for the new rebuilt Chicago. So as a result, give me the next slide, Melody. As a result, when George Ellery Hale was growing up, he certainly didn't want for anything. He was always a studious young man. He was kind of bookish, and he loved the sciences. His first love was biology, and his father indulged his son by buying him a fine binocular microscope, and George Ellery Hale studied life in a drop of pond water, or whatever it is biologists do. I don't really get biology. It's the study of squishy living things. But what happened was, in the same suburb that the Hales lived was a double star observer, a rather famous man, Burnham, who was a court reporter by day, and he was a double star observer at night. And even when George Ellery Hale was maybe 12 years old, he made friends with Burnham, and he fell in love with astronomy. Burnham knew of a fine Alvin Clark & Sons refractor, 4-inch refractor that was coming up on the market, and George Ellery Hale asked his dad, please buy it for me, and his dad again indulged his son, bought him this fine telescope. This was a really fine telescope. It's the sort of telescope a professional would have been happy to have. It's kind of like sending your kid off to college and they need a car and they ask for a Lamborghini. I mean, this was really an excellent instrument. But George Ellery Hale, like so many people, he immediately started studying the night sky. He was fascinated with astrophysics, which is the application of physics and spectroscopy so that you could start to learn what stuff is made of by analyzing its light. And he suffered from the same thing all astronomers do. We call it aperture fever. After a while, he wanted a larger telescope. So he asked his dad to buy him a 6-inch refracting telescope. And his dad indulged his son and did this. And then after a while, George Ellery Hale wanted an even larger telescope, and I think at a certain point, William Hale kind of called a timeout because he realized, I'm going to go broke providing telescopes for my son. So he did something rather fascinating. He made his son actually write it out on paper. What the smaller instrument was no longer accomplishing, why he needed the larger instrument, and basically justify the purchase. And this turned out to be a fantastic life lesson for George Ellery Hale, because while he did go on to become a very accomplished scientist and astronomer, particularly in solar astronomy, he always maintained that the sun is the only star close enough to study in great detail. And so to learn about stars in general, we must learn about our sun. While he did do tremendous discoveries in great science, his primary talent was extracting money from rich old men. This he did very, very well. You know, he started at home with his dad, but then he found out about these 40-inch glass blanks that were unpaid for, languishing in the optical shops of Alvin Clark and Sons. And the next rich old man he taps is Charles Yerkes. If I could have the next slide, Melody. He taps Charles Yerkes for money, and Yerkes was not very well liked in Chicago. He was a ruthless businessman. He steamrolled over the competition, and the local papers called him Yerkes the Boodler. I'm not really even sure what boodler means, but it doesn't sound complimentary. Don't call me a boodler, please. And the boodler wanted to make his name more golden. And Hale convinced him that the way to do that was to attach it to a large telescope. So Yerkes pledged $500,000, and at age 26, George Ellery Hale was the founder and director of the observatory with the world's largest operating telescope. This telescope was a 40-inch refracting telescope. This means that this telescope uses lenses to focus the light. And you can see there's the Yerkes Observatory. That other Kenwood Observatory is George Ellery Hale's personal observatory. It had a 15-inch refracting telescope in it. And that was basically a gift from his dad. Let me have the next slide. So in 1903, George Ellery Hale comes out here to California. Now, the observatory that we're at right now is not the first observatory here on the mountain. Harvard had a temporary observatory here in 1889, but they packed up and left, and they moved that instrument to South America, where it did some very important work. But George Ellery Hale heard about the short 18 months that Harvard was here, and he knew that Wisconsin wasn't really a great place to set up a telescope, and he really wanted to set up a telescope in the nice, clear California air. And I realize I sound like I'm a liar right now, because we're not really clear, but it's clear here a lot of the time. So he came out in 1903 to check it out. He liked what he saw, and the next rich old man he taps is Andrew Carnegie. Famous for Carnegie Steel, the Carnegie Libraries, Carnegie Hall, and he gets $150,000 out of Andrew Carnegie to start the Mount Wilson Solar Observatory. Let me have the next slide. This is actually an expedition where he was testing the quality of the air here. One of the very important things to astronomers, in addition to darkness, is the steadiness of the air. And here on Mount Wilson, the air is very steady because it's been traveling westbound over the Pacific Ocean for a very long time. And it has smoothed out. And these mountains, there aren't many foothills. You can see Mount Wilson coming up from the flat plain of Pasadena very abruptly. And so this is the first mountain range to really deflect the air, and you get a nice laminar airflow. Also, Mount Wilson is above the inversion layer, and the air really steadies above the inversion layer. So George Ellery Hale tested all these things, and he liked what he saw, and he decided this is where he would set up his observatory. If I could have the next slide. He also set up an optical shop and laboratory on Santa Barbara Street in Pasadena. This is one of the earliest buildings there. Santa Barbara Street is a very short street in Pasadena, and the Carnegie astronomers still use it as their headquarters. If you could give me the next slide, I'll show you. This is their main office building right here. This is a lecture hall over here. Over here are their optical shops and laboratories. And over here, you can see these circles painted in the pavement of the parking lot. That is the telescope they're currently building. It'll be a 24-meter class telescope using a central mirror with a hole in it and 6 mirrors around it, all working together. When they finish it, and we're hoping they finish it sometime in the early 2020s, this will be the world's largest telescope yet again. So give me the next slide, please. Now, of course, this was considered the Mount Wilson Solar Observatory until about 1915. The word solar was dropped when the nighttime telescopes were nearing completion. But the first telescope on the mountain is the Snow Telescope, which went operational in 1905. It is the earliest permanently mounted telescope on this mountain. It also holds the distinction of being the world's first permanently mounted solar telescope. Prior to the Snow, solar telescopes were made to come apart into pieces, and they would be moved to be set up in the path of a total solar eclipse. That's what scientists really wanted to study back then. But Hale really wanted to study the sun all the time, and so he mounted the Snow here, and it was the first permanently mounted solar telescope devoted to astrophysics and spectroscopy. Then he did have problems with the Snow, with heating up inside of it. So the next telescope he built a tower telescope 60 foot high, and you can see that right outside the auditorium when you walk around. And then he built a 150-foot tower telescope to get larger image scale. Both the Snow and the 60-foot telescope give you about a 6-inch solar image in diameter, and 150 gives you about a 15-inch solar image. Let me have the next one. Also, he decided he needed a place for the astronomers to stay. Prior to this, most observatories were like little villages where the director of the observatory was also the mayor of the village. And Hale really didn't want that. He wanted a completely separate facility. So the astronomers and their families lived down in the Pasadena area, but if they had an observing run of like 3 or 4 nights, they could stay at the monastery. And originally it was built out of wood, and you can see the dog here, his name is Solar. Unfortunately, a kitchen fire destroyed it. If you could give me the next slide, Melody. So they rebuilt it exactly the same way, but this time more fireproof. And as you can see, Solar did make it through the fire. All right, next one. So in addition, Hale, while he concentrated on solar astronomy, he knew also that he wanted, nighttime astronomy. That was going to play a big role. The last gift of William Hale to his son was a 60-inch glass blank to be made into a mirror. Hale realized after building the 40-inch at Yerkes that refractors had kind of run their course. The problem with refractors is since they use lenses to focus the light, you have to send the light through them. You can only support them by their edges. And glass does bend. And so depending on how you orient the telescope, the glass might flex a little bit. And in optics, a little bit is too much. So Hale realized that the next big telescopes were really going to be reflecting type telescopes. The way a reflecting telescope works is that it has a mirror, a glass blank mirror that has a concave curve ground into it, and it's a first surface mirror. It's silvered or now more modern aluminized on that first surface. The light never goes through the glass. The glass is just a substrate to hold a few grams of silver or aluminum in exactly the correct position to focus the light and make it into a telescope. That's one of the fascinating things about modern telescopes. is that really all that steel and all that glass is really about a few grams of aluminum held in exactly the right position to focus the light. So they started building the telescope. You can advance to the next slide. This is the tube of the 60-inch telescope on Santa Barbara Street. Give me the next slide. I need to go through these faster. That's the completed telescope in 1908, and it remained the world's largest telescope until the 100-inch telescope was built. Give me the next slide. And we did have public viewing on it way back when. The Mount Wilson Hotel was still operating, and guests of the hotel would come to the observatory. They'd form a big line, and they could look through the telescope. But most of the time, this was all privately funded with Andrew Carnegie's money. There's no government money at this facility, and so it was a research facility. That's an important thing to understand. That distinguishes it from places like Griffith Observatory, which is really a public outreach center. Should have really been called the Griffith Planetarium, but they started building it before the planetarium technology was perfected, and so it was called the Griffith Observatory. Let me have the next one. Andrew Carnegie did visit. Here, let me point him out. This is him right here, standing next to George Ellery Hale. He's also, I think, right here. I've got a really bad angle, so I don't know if I'm pointing to the right man. Give me the next slide. Hale was a diplomat. He knew where the money was coming from. Andrew Carnegie was very sensitive about his somewhat diminutive stature. He was not a very tall man. So you notice that even as they're walking, George Ellery Hale is stooping. He's always trying to make sure that he's flattering Carnegie and makes sure that he's happy. Give me the next slide. That shows it even better. This is a picture during his visit in 1910, and you notice that George Ellery Hale is actually standing downslope of Andrew Carnegie, so that Carnegie is, looks a little bit taller. And George Ellery Hale is not about to tell the richest man in the world that he buttoned his coat crookedly. Give me the next slide. So then the 100-inch started getting built. Now, George Ellery Hale was a very progressive thinker. He was moving on to the next big thing even before the last big thing was finished. So the 60-inch was the world's largest telescope, but the day the mirror was mounted in the 60-inch, that very day in December of 1908, the 100-inch blank for the 100-inch mirror arrived at the optical shops on Santa Barbara Street. So he didn't even have proof that his 60-inch would work. Of course, he knew it would. He was already building a larger telescope. So here's the basic construction. You can go to the next slide for me. Great, you can see, the going up. Give me the next slide. There is the completed 100-inch telescope. This is the original control panel for it. We have modernized certain things for pointing accuracy, but the basic telescope is still exactly the same as it was back then. Let me have the next slide. So Hale was also a big civic booster for Pasadena. He fell in love with Southern California. And he's responsible, of course, for the Yerkes Observatory. Then he founded the Mount Wilson Observatory. He founded Caltech. He played a leading role in that. Him and two other people got together. They reorganized the Troop Institute, which was a technical school for boys, into an actual, a new MIT, which was his goal. He also encouraged Henry Huntington to set up the Huntington Library and Gardens. Huntington was originally going to will all of his stuff to the state, and it would have gotten caught up in so much litigation. And George Ellery Hale convinced him to set up an endowment and make it accessible to the public without the litigation. So he's largely responsible for the Huntington Gardens. He built a small solar laboratory not far from Caltech. He also was responsible for planning of Centennial Square in Pasadena, where we have City Hall on the east, and to the north we have the library, and to the south we have the auditorium and civic center. And then he began work on building the 200-inch telescope in 1928. He wanted an even larger instrument. One of the things to understand about astronomical telescopes, everyone knows that a telescope magnifies, but that's not the primary job of a telescope. What a telescope really does is it gathers light, and the larger a telescope, the more light, the fainter light it can gather. And fainter things tend to be farther away, so larger telescopes can see deeper into space. And this is why aperture fever happens. Astronomers are always looking to build larger and larger telescopes. Or as I like to say on my tours, you know, when it comes to telescopes, size definitely matters, and bigger is definitely better. Sorry, fellas. And that's just the way it goes. So Carnegie is now building the world's largest telescope, even as we speak. Let me have the next slide. The Hale telescope, the 200-inch on Palomar, George Ellery Hale did not live to see its completion. He passed away in 1938. Construction on the telescope was also stalled by World War II, and it wasn't completed until 1948, 10 years after George Ellery Hale passed away. But in his honor, the telescope was named the Hale Telescope. And the last slide. There you go. Does anyone have any question? Let me see what our time is, because I probably went. I've got 8 minutes. Yes, sir. It isn't brand new construction. People ask about it all the time. It's our UFO landing pad. No. It's actually a 500,000 gallon water tank, and we're refurbishing it. It had cracks and leaks in it. It's not potable water. It's really made for firefighting. In fact, the most recent fire that happened here just a couple weeks ago, we had to dip into our drinking water to put that out. The firefighters had to, and that really puts a strain on the observatory infrastructure. So we tend to have that one filled with non-drinkable firefighting water. That's what that is. Yes, Michael.
Are any of the lenses at 60 or 100 inch covered in anything?
Oh, yes. All of the telescopes have a mirror cover. It's like the petals of a flower. So we cover the telescope. In fact, when we're operating the telescope, we have strict operating rules. We open the dome shutter first, because when you open a shutter, maybe a little bit of rust and dirt might fall, and we don't want that to fall on the mirror. The last thing we do is uncover the mirror, and then the telescope is operational. Yes, sir?
Yeah, wasn't the mountain named for Benjamin Wilson?
Yes, it was. Benjamin Davis Wilson was born in 1811 in Tennessee, and he came out to California in 1841. And he became quite wealthy here. He married well. He fell in love with the whole area. And he first started, he was probably the first legitimate, I say legitimate because some horse rustlers had a little bit of, hideouts up here in the mountains. But Benjamin Davis Wilson was the first person with a legitimate reason to come up here. He actually blazed kind of Europeanized the old Indian trail that led from Sierra Madre, and it's still in use by hikers today. And so the mountain was named Wilson's Peak for Benjamin Davis Wilson. Yes, way in back, and I'll get to over here next.
So you mentioned a gentleman with the last name Burnham.
Yes.
Is he the same Burnham of Burnham's Celestial Catalog?
Excellent question, and no. He's a different Burnham. The Burnham that wrote the Celestial Handbook, which I love, I have that on my bookshelf, passed away fairly recently, but he worked for the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona, and he was more contemporary. The S.W. Burnham that Hale knew had passed away quite a while ago. Back there, I had somebody, I just want to make sure I'm there. Yes?
Could you mention some of the scientists that have worked on those mountains?
Yeah, but it would probably take me a very long time, and there will be other talks. The most famous astronomer to work here, of course, is Edwin Hubble. And that's not entirely a coincidence. Hubble was definitely a publicity hound. He knew how to get his name out. And it was Hubble's work that pretty much nailed down that the spiral nebulae that had been being photographed for so many years were actually external galaxies. I do like to point this out. People like to say that Edwin Hubble discovered galaxies, as though he discovered them out of the blue. And I'm not trying to take away from Edwin Hubble, but what he really did is settle the question. Astronomers were divided on whether these spirals were part of our own Milky Way galaxy, maybe like gas swirling clouds, or whether they were actually other galaxies in their own right. What Hubble did was answer that question in a way that couldn't be refuted anymore. He pegged the distance down to the Andromeda at about 650,000 light years. That was wrong. It had to get modified later. But then he also found that almost all of the galaxies, with the exception of the ones that are closest in to us, are moving away from us. And the farther away a galaxy is, the faster it is moving away. So essentially, he laid the groundwork for the Big Bang Theory and the expanding universe. He himself was very conservative. He studied law before he became an astronomer, and he never wanted any of his decisions to be overturned. So he never really talked about the expansion of the universe, and he always referred to the movement of the galaxies as apparent redshifts. He really wanted to hedge his bets. Another very important astronomer who worked here is Walter Botta. He was a German astronomer who came out here in the early 30s, and his work essentially doubled the size and age of the universe. During World War II, he was working on these telescopes. Yes?
When you feel they're in the process of building a new telescope right now, where will it be located once it's built?
The Giant Magellan Telescope will be located in Las Campanas, Chile, at their Chilean observatory. The advantage of Las Campanas, it has all of the advantages of Mount Wilson. It is a coastal mountain range. It's arid. The air is quite clear there. It has great steadiness of air, just like Mount Wilson, but it has one thing Mount Wilson doesn't have, and that's dark skies. There's no Los Angeles under those mountains. So astronomers that work for Carnegie on Santa Barbara Street, actually, they run telescopes in Chile. If you have an observing run, it takes about 24 hours to get to the observatory. That's all the travel from your home, all the connections and everything else. 24 hours later, you're in Las Campanas. You stay for about a week, you gather your data, and then you come back here, and it's at Santa Barbara Street, their offices, where they do the data reduction. Have I answered the question well? Yes, sir.
See, how often do the mirrors have to be illuminized, and where are they done?
They need to be illuminized about once every 3 years. Let me just check the time. Yeah, this is going to be the last question. They need to be re-illuminized every 3 years. So we just had the 100-inch mirror illuminized earlier this year. And I was actually part of that process. They're kind of training me to do a little bit of everything here on this mountain. So I got to be part of the process of re-illuminizing. And we do it right here on the mountain. The vacuum chamber for illuminizing the mirror is on the ground floor of the 100-inch dome. When we need to re-illuminize the 60-inch, we remove that mirror and we roll it over, very carefully, mind you, to the 100-inch dome, and it's illuminized there. All right. I know that there are probably more questions, but I should allow our next group to come in. Those of you who just sat for this talk, maybe you might want to go grab yourself something to eat. Thank you. You're too kind. Thank you.